My name is Patrick Wegger. I'm from EMPA, the Technology and Society Lab. This is the original title of the project I will present, Constraint-Aware Pathways to the Post-Fossil City, Swiss City, acronym CAPACITY. I will say some more words on the people behind the project later in my last slide. So first, something about the motivation. The 21st century is expected to become the century of cities, with urban spaces being the central organizational form of society, as illustrated in this NASA picture from Europe by night, early this century. This was early this century, so about 15 years ago. Reaching the goals of the Agenda 2030 and of the Paris Agreement will require an active design of the transition to these future cities. That's our position, where you have to take into account the environmental implications and the societal implications of such transformation, and also the effects, for example, of a growing metallization induced by informatization and electrification. What we think is that simulation games are a well-suited tool to allow to test and experience possible transition pathways in a multi-stakeholder learning process. So not only to provide knowledge, but to involve the stakeholders to make them experience. In German, it's erfahren und erleben these possible transition in a simulation environment. So the goal and scope of the project is to develop a generic simulation game that allows to find these possible pathways towards future cities by showing through numerical simulation whether and how they respect physical metabolic constraints, and by revealing through playing of the game possible trade-offs between the involved stakeholder goals. So this year will be implemented by developing a dynamic simulation model addressing the material and energy stocks and flows induced by the urban structures and activities. Starting point for developing this dynamic model will be a model we have developed at EMPA for the Federal Office of the Environment, addressing the Swiss Building Stock 2015, Bauwerk Schweiz 2015, including the most relevant material and energy stocks and flows, and evaluating them with regard to environmental impacts. So when I say revealing through playing the game, I mean this model, this dynamic simulation model you see here at the bottom. I also mean the rules of interaction between the players, and finally the simulator interface, which will link these gaming series or the rules of the game with the dynamic simulation model, including back end and front end. And then what we then will do is to apply the simulation game to explore pathways to the post-fossil Swiss City 2050, which is a fictional built environment covering Switzerland and sheltering 10 million people, including structures and services, which is basically the lowland as an entire city. And this Swiss City 2050 is expected to be both net fossil carbon free in 2050 and a substantial atmospheric carbon sink by 2100, which is basically the longer term vanishing point when developing these pathways, the last point. The approach is we apply the design science and research approach, which is basically a guideline to co-create complex artifacts, such a simulation game, in an iterative process. So this iterative is very important in our project. There will be many of them, we expect. So the central cycle in this design science research process is the design cycle, which drives the entire process and project, including activities related to building and evaluating prototypes, And this design cycle will be linked to the relevant cycle, which is about putting the simulation game or the process into its contextual environment. And these are the stakeholders who will guarantee that in our project. And here to the right, the rigor cycle, which is linking to scientific knowledge and expertise represented mainly by the experts involved in our project. And the second concept behind developing this simulation game is the game design sequence, according to Duke and Gertz. This results in, basically, if you don't consider the first step, in 5 steps. Identifying requirements for the simulation game, defining elements of the simulation game, creating a blueprint of the simulation game, and building the simulation game prototype, including, all in all, 6 workshops, 3 to build the simulation game prototype. This is the first phase, covering 2 years, development and implementation. We will have a second phase, which is applying the simulation game in 2 game series involving, of course, again, stakeholders and experts. And at the end of the project, we will document, of course, and disseminate this game. So these are the people behind. We have the core project team here with the main applicants and supervisors. We have our junior team who will take care of performing this project. Actually, we are supervising them, they are doing the work. No, but it's a postdoc, Andreas Gerber, who will be responsible for designing and coordinating the game and coordinating the 2 PhD students, Marta Roca-Puigros and Joao Gonçalves. So I'm happy you're part of our team, and I'm sure you're doing a great work. We also have an experts and stakeholder pool, and finally an advisory board, including also the Federal Office for the Environment, which fell out, basically because I was hesitating between writing BAFU and FOEN, and then I forgot it, obviously. But they will play an important role, for example, as a policy, from a policy perspective.